Athena wasn't born. She erupted, fully grown, fully armed, straight out of her father's skull. And she'd spend the rest of mythology being the one Olympian who consistently outthought everyone else in the room, including Zeus himself, trusted with the Greeks' armies, their courts, their weavers and craftsmen, and even their most famous wandering hero's long road home. No other Olympian shows up this often, this directly, in the actual lives of mortals. We already told part of this story in our episode on Zeus. Zeus's first wife, the Titaness Metis, was prophesied to bear a child who would overthrow him, so Zeus swallowed her whole, hoping to prevent it. It didn't work exactly as planned. Metis was already pregnant, and by most accounts she continued her work inside Zeus, quietly forging weapons and armor for the daughter growing within him. Eventually, Zeus was struck with a blinding headache so severe he ordered Hephaestus, god of the forge, to split his skull open with an axe to relieve the pain. Out sprang Athena, not as an infant, but fully grown, fully armored, already carrying a spear and shield, letting out a battle cry so fierce it shook Olympus itself and briefly stopped every other god in their tracks. Athena became goddess of wisdom, strategic warfare, and crafts, a very different portfolio from her half-brother Ares, god of wars, chaos, and bloodlust. Where Ares represented war as raw violence, Athena represented war as strategy, discipline, tactics, the calculated use of force rather than force for its own sake. The two clashed directly and repeatedly during the Trojan War. In one particularly famous episode from the Iliad, Athena struck Ares down with a boulder mid-battle, the goddess of calculated strategy physically defeating the god of chaotic violence, a detail we covered in one of our very first crossover shorts. In another, she guided the mortal hero Diomedes' own spear into Ares' side, wounding an Olympian god through a human hand rather than her own. Proof, to the Greeks who told this story, that strategy guided by a god could overpower brute divine strength. Her combat record wasn't limited to fellow Olympians either. During the Gigantomachy, the war between the gods and a race of monstrous giants, Athena personally struck down the giant Enceladus, burying him beneath the island of Sicily, a myth ancient Greeks pointed to whenever the volcano at Mount Etna rumbled, believing it was Enceladus still struggling beneath the stone. Athena's guidance extended to plenty of mortal heroes beyond the battlefield itself. When the hero Bellerophon needed to tame the winged horse Pegasus in order to hunt down the monstrous chimera, it was Athena who appeared to him in a dream and gifted him a golden bridle, letting him approach and control the wild horse where every earlier attempt had failed. With Pegasus tamed, Bellerophon went on to defeat the chimera from the air. A hunt this channel will cover in full once we reach the chimera's own episode down the line. Athena's most famous victory, though, came against her uncle Poseidon, not Ares. We told this story from Poseidon's side in our last episode, the contest for patronage of a new prosperous city. Poseidon struck the earth and produced salt water, or by some accounts, the first horse. Athena planted an olive tree, offering the city food, oil, and wood. The people chose her gift. The city took her name, Athens. She'd go on to become the city's protector under several distinct titles. Athena Polias as guardian of the city itself, and Athena Nike as bringer of victory, with the Parthenon built on its highest hill specifically in her honor, one of the most recognizable temples still standing in the world today. Unlike nearly every other major Olympian, Athena had no husband and no children through romantic union. She was one of 3 virgin goddesses in the Greek pantheon, alongside Artemis and Hestia, who deliberately avoided marriage and romantic entanglement. In a mythology defined by Zeus's countless affairs and Poseidon's numerous consorts, Athena's total independence was itself remarkable. She owed her position to no one, was defined by no husband's reputation, and answered to no one but her own judgment. That independence was tested directly by Hephaestus, the same god who had freed her from Zeus's skull. According to the myth, Hephaestus pursued Athena romantically, And when she firmly refused him, his advance still resulted in a child forming from the earth itself. Athena took the infant, Erichthonius, and raised him in secret rather than abandon him, sealing him inside a woven chest and entrusting it to the 3 daughters of the Athenian king Cecrops, with one condition: never open it. 2 of the sisters couldn't resist, and what they found inside, the child guarded by serpents, reportedly drove them to their deaths in horror. Erichthonius survived, was raised properly, and went on to become one of Athens' own early kings, giving the city's founding myth a strange, distinctly Athena-shaped origin. Athena's judgment extended beyond myth into law itself. In the story of Orestes, a mortal who killed his own mother to avenge his father's murder, the Furies pursued him relentlessly for the crime of matricide, and Athena was asked to judge the case herself. Rather than rule alone, she did something unprecedented. She assembled a jury of Athenian citizens, the first trial by jury in Greek myth, on a hill that would come to be called the Areopagus. The vote came back tied, and Athena cast the deciding ballot, voting to acquit Orestes and, according to the playwright Aeschylus, permanently transforming the vengeful Furies into the Eumenides, the kindly ones, protectors of the very city she'd already claimed as her own. Ancient Athenians pointed to this myth as the origin of their own justice system. If you're enjoying this, hit like and subscribe. What Athena's about to do to the mortal who challenged her explains something we still talk about today. That fierce independence showed itself clearly again in the myth of Arachne, a mortal weaver so skilled she boasted her talent rivaled Athena's own, a direct challenge to Athena Ergain, her own aspect as patron of weavers and craftsmen. Athena, offended, challenged her to a weaving contest. Arachne's tapestry was, by most accounts, genuinely flawless, and worse, it depicted the gods' worst behavior in vivid, unflattering detail, including several of Zeus's affairs. Enraged, Athena destroyed the tapestry and, in most versions, transformed Arachne into the very first spider, cursed to weave for eternity. It's a myth ancient Greeks used to explain the origin of spiders, and a reminder that even the goddess of wisdom wasn't above punishing a mortal for simply telling an uncomfortable truth. Athena's temper appears again in the myth of Medusa, a story significant enough that it'll get its own full episode later on this channel. When Poseidon pursued Medusa inside Athena's own temple, Athena punished Medusa rather than Poseidon, transforming her into the snake-haired monster remembered in myth today. Later, when the hero Perseus needed to defeat Medusa, it was Athena who guided him, providing a polished shield to use as a mirror so he could strike without meeting the Gorgon's petrifying gaze directly. After Medusa's death, Athena placed the Gorgon's severed head on her own shield, the Aegis, wearing the very face of a curse she herself had created as a permanent symbol of her power. Athena also played a direct role in starting the Trojan War. At a wedding feast, a golden apple inscribed, "For the fairest," was tossed among the goddesses, sparking a bitter rivalry between Athena, Hera, and Aphrodite over who deserved it. A mortal prince, Paris, was chosen to judge. Each goddess offered him a bribe. Hera offered political power, Athena offered wisdom and skill in battle, and Aphrodite offered the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris chose Aphrodite's bribe, and that woman was Helen, already married to a Greek king. The resulting war lasted 10 years. Athena, having lost the judgment, sided firmly with the Greeks for the rest of the conflict. One more piece of that same war ties back to her directly. Troy's own protection depended on a sacred statue called the Palladium, an image of Athena herself, said to have fallen from the sky and guarded the city for as long as it stayed within its walls. Greek heroes Odysseus and Diomedes eventually stole it in a secret night raid, a theft ancient sources credited with finally making Troy's fall possible, meaning the goddess who judged against the city was, quite literally, part of the reason its walls could finally be breached. Even after Athena had backed the Greeks for a full 10 years of war, their victory came with a price. During the sack of Troy itself, one of the Greek soldiers, Ajax the Lesser, dragged the Trojan princess Cassandra from Athena's own temple and violated the sanctuary in the process, ignoring Cassandra's desperate grip on Athena's cult statue. Athena was enraged, not at the war's outcome, but at the violation of her own sacred space, and turned against the very army she'd spent a decade supporting. She asked her uncle Poseidon, of all gods, to help her wreck the Greek fleet on its voyage home, scattering ships in violent storms across the Aegean. It's the real mythological reason so many returning Greek heroes, Odysseus most famously among them, took years to make it back at all. Athena's strategic favor didn't end with the war itself. Throughout Homer's Odyssey, she becomes the hero Odysseus's personal protector, guiding him through a 10-year journey home and disguising herself along the way as an old beggar, a shepherd, and most often as mentor, a trusted family friend, to steer both him and his son Telemachus without ever revealing her true face. It's the origin of the word mentor itself, still used today for exactly the kind of behind-the-scenes guidance Athena specialized in. Without her intervention, Homer's story makes clear, Odysseus never makes it home at all. Much of what we know about Athena comes from Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, where she appears more directly involved in mortal affairs than almost any other god, and Hesiod's Theogony, which details her dramatic birth. Her temple, the Parthenon, still stands today atop the Acropolis in Athens, and once housed the Athena Parthenos, a nearly 40-foot statue of the goddess built from gold and ivory by the sculptor Phidias, one of the ancient world's most famous works of art, now lost, known to us only through smaller Roman copies and written descriptions. Archaeological and literary evidence from Pausanias confirms her cult was among the most widespread and celebrated in the ancient Greek world, and the Panathenaic festival, an enormous annual celebration held in her honor, drew Athenians from across the region every year to celebrate her patronage of the city. Homer's most common epithet for her, Glaucopis, means owl-eyed or bright-eyed, and is likely the root of her enduring association with the owl. Each Panathenaic festival climaxed with a new, elaborately woven robe called the peplos, carried through the city and presented to her cult statue, a tribute fittingly made by the same craft Athena claimed as her own domain. Roman mythology adapted her into Minerva, keeping her association with wisdom, strategy, and crafts largely intact. Athena's legacy is one of consistent competence in a pantheon full of chaos. She didn't rule through fear like Zeus, or hold grudges like Poseidon, or lose herself to passion like so many other gods. She thought first, acted second, and rarely lost, except notably to a golden apple she never even wanted in the first place. Her owl and her olive branch remain recognizable symbols of wisdom to this day, thousands of years after her temple was first built. We've now covered Hades, Zeus, and Poseidon. Next, the god who couldn't stand losing to his own sister, Ares, god of war. That story is coming next. Subscribe so you don't miss it.